All right. Today we're talking about disproportionality in our schools. What is the definition of disproportionality? It's an overrepresentation of minority students in special education. Examples would be African Americans, Hispanics, and American Indian. The first one of the articles I came across was Brown versus Board of Education, the changing of the law. Basically, what this law did was end the segregation in schools. But what some schools, especially in the South, started doing is they started to label kids of African American as mentally retarded in a wide variety of different disabilities to, again, displace them out of the classroom, but have documentation and coverage for that, so they could still technically be abiding by the law that was passed. So as you can see, it's a 540% increase in African American students being labeled as mentally retarded. So that meant they were placed in less challenging environments and separated from their white counterparts. And in the next article, talked about should we implement a nationwide definition of disproportionality? Should we start holding the states more accountable, especially those states that have a high rate of disproportionality? Should the federal government step in? This article did state that one of the problems with IDIA is that teachers, social workers, psychologists often have a subjective/biased opinion on minority students. So the question to ask yourselves, would a nationwide definition help promote consistency in how states determine those students eligible for special education services? So basically another revision to IDIA to curb the disproportionality in special education. The topic being brought before us is, should we redo the law and come up with a game plan to reduce the number of minority students being labeled in special education somehow? So some more statistics from the research is one of the articles looked at 18,000 students in urban school districts. The biggest, one of the bigger indicators of low socioeconomic male students was the biggest group being labeled. Most common predictors were, again, race, gender, and again, socioeconomic. African American students are 2 times more likely still today to be labeled with an emotional disturbance, and 2.7 more times likely to be labeled with a cognitive impairment. And then Native American students are likely to be labeled with a severe learning disability. And then another thing is Asian students are underrepresented in special education, where they're 46% less likely. Culture responsive teaching is one of the solutions to the problem. So what you would do is, what we need to ask ourselves, are universities preparing future teachers for the growing minority population in our school system? Are we doing culture responsive teachings? Are teachers getting to learn about their students and about their previous experiences and learning about their students so they can enhance the learning in their classroom? One of the things that occurred was RTI. It's an evidence-based approach. A school district in Columbia, Missouri, took action by catching learning disabilities early through RTI. They focused on all students regardless of their race and gender. They did a universal screening process and detected students that needed level 2 interventions, and then they also established evidence-based interventions, used things such as grief and trauma interventions, and in some other groups, theater and troop and peer education project, and child-centered play. The combination of these strategies did indeed help reduce the disproportionality in the schools. So again, you need to ask yourself, if we come up with a plan where we force states to reduce the number of minorities in special education, it has to start early in kindergarten through more RTI, more universal screening, and being able to catch these kids early as opposed to late. And then it goes more. Another article talked about RTI. Another study showed positive effects on RTI and also getting teachers culturally relevant. And then in this article did single out African American students because, again, they are the #1 group getting special education services. The final notes is I took out of this is poverty does have a huge effect on whether students get special education services. African American students lead the way on getting special education services, and Asian students are underrepresented in special education because of the stereotype that many assume Asian students are smart, so they get overlooked in place of the African American, Hispanic, and students from more uh, poor backgrounds. Many stated African American Hispanic students are more programmed for punishment than white students, and evidence states that RTI and becoming more culturally well-rounded would help reduce disproportionality in education. So, in my closing thoughts, it is evident that we do have a problem here in their country with disproportionality. And the questions you got to ask yourself: should the government step in and help get states to control and then come down on the school districts to come up with solutions such as RTI and getting teachers more culture relevant with their students? So that's my presentation. Have a great day.